The wind was sharp as knives across the ruined plains of Dulverus 9. Black clouds rolled across the alien sky, hiding what little light was left. In the middle of the battlefield stood a human soldier, blood-streaked and breathing hard. His uniform was torn, his hands were bound behind his back, and around his neck hung a silver collar, shining against his dusty skin. He was the last prisoner of war, the only survivor from the Terran outpost that the Zareth Dominion had crushed the night before. Tall and proud despite his chains, his name was Commander Jace Ward, and the alien standing before him was no ordinary conqueror. She was Empress Velzari, ruler of 100 star systems. Her skin shimmered green and gold. Her violet eyes glowed like twin moons. Her voice could silence a room or crush a will. And now she stared at Jace as if he were an insect she didn't know whether to kill or keep. Velzari had expected another weak human begging for life. She had broken thousands with a glance, but Jace did not bow. He looked her straight in the eyes, and when she stepped closer he smiled, just a little. That smile was a problem. That smile sparked something she didn't expect. She wanted to hurt him, but she also wanted to understand him. So instead of ordering his death, she gave him a different fate. Put him in the royal kennel, she said coldly. Let him learn his place. Let him crawl before he stands again. The soldiers hesitated. No one had ever heard of a human surviving this long, let alone being taken to the Empress's private chambers. But none dared question her order. Chains rattled as Jace was dragged away, still standing tall, collar shining in the light. In the lower chambers of her palace, Jace found himself not in a cell, but in a luxurious room filled with alien silks and floating lights. It was a strange kind of prison. No guards, no weapons. But the walls whispered secrets and the ceiling watched him. Still, Jace didn't flinch. He sat calmly and waited. He knew she would come. And she did. Velzari entered without armor this time. She wore a flowing royal robe that shifted color with her mood. Tonight it pulsed with curiosity and irritation. She didn't speak right away. She circled him slowly. He didn't move. He didn't beg. His eyes followed her, but his mouth stayed shut. Finally she asked, "Why don't you kneel like the others?" He answered without hesitation, "Because I'm not like the others." The words hung in the air between them like smoke. The Empress narrowed her eyes. "You will kneel. All creatures kneel before the Dominion." Jace tilted his head. "Even those who have nothing left to lose?" That answer struck deeper than she expected. She turned and left, but that night she didn't sleep. She dreamed of fire, of human eyes in the dark, and of a collar on her own neck. The next day, she returned. This time she brought questions instead of commands. She asked about Earth, about human courage, about how he could stay proud when everything he knew was gone. And Jace answered each question calmly, truthfully, like a man who had seen too much but refused to be broken. Every word cracked something inside her. Every silence made her listen harder. Velzari didn't realize it yet, but something inside her was changing. She had brought him here to humiliate him, to turn him into a symbol of her power. But now, when she watched him, she felt uncertain. She felt challenged, and in a strange way, she felt alive. No one had spoken to her like that in years. No one had dared. But Jace didn't just dare, he made her want to keep coming back. Outside, the war still burned across galaxies. But inside that room, a different battle had begun. A silent war of words, of stares, of unspoken questions. And day by day, something new was growing between the conqueror and the captured. She thought she had claimed a pet. But now she was the one returning to the cage. And every time she looked at that collar around his neck, she wondered something that terrified her more than any weapon. What if, without even touching her, this human had already won? Velzari stood before the mirror in her private chamber. The polished glass reflected not only her flawless skin and royal braids, but also something she couldn't name. Her eyes, once cold and sure, now held a flicker of doubt. Her hand moved to her throat unconsciously, as if checking for something missing. It was nothing. And yet, it felt like something was tightening around her soul. She told herself it was strategy. Understanding the human mind was important. If she could break the strongest of them, the rest would fall like dust. But each visit to Jace left her with more questions than answers. He didn't shout or fight. He didn't plead or praise. He simply waited. Every word he spoke was sharp, but never cruel. Every look he gave was calm, but never afraid. He wasn't resisting, he was existing. Proudly existing, the palace staff began whispering. The Empress had never taken an interest in a captive before. Never spent more than 5 minutes with any outsider, unless to deliver judgment. But with Jace, she stayed for hours. She asked him about Earth, about its skies, its animals, even its music. He spoke with sadness, but not weakness. When he mentioned the sea, his voice softened. When he described the smell of rain on soil, she found herself closing her eyes. Jace never spoke of war, unless asked. And when he did, his words carried weight. He described how humanity had fought not to conquer, but to survive. How they buried their dead with songs. How even in defeat, they helped each other stand. Velzari had never heard war spoken of like that. In her world, war was numbers, tactics, control. But Jace made it sound like something sacred. Something painful. Something alive. That night, Velzari dismissed her guards early. She walked the palace halls alone, her bare feet touching the cold alien stone. When she reached the chamber where Jace stayed, she paused. She told herself she came for questions. But deep inside, she didn't know what she was looking for anymore. She opened the door without knocking. Jace sat on the floor, legs crossed, eyes closed. He didn't flinch. He only said, "Couldn't sleep either?" She sat down across from him, no throne. No guards, no armor. Just two souls surrounded by silence. The lights in the room dimmed on their own, sensing her mood. For a while, neither spoke. Then she said, "You confuse me." Jace opened his eyes. "Good. That means you're thinking." Her lips twitched, not quite a smile. Most creatures beg to be spared. He leaned forward slightly. "I'm not a creature, I'm a man." Velzari studied him. His shoulders were strong but not proud. His jaw was set but not defiant. He had lost everything. And yet, he looked like someone who could rebuild it all with just a fire in his hands. She reached forward suddenly and touched the collar around his neck. "You wear this, but it doesn't control you. Why?" Jace looked into her eyes. "Because control is not in metal or laws, it's in choice. And I choose to remain human." Her fingers trembled slightly as she pulled her hand back. Her own voice dropped lower. "What if someone like me forgets how to choose?" Jace didn't blink. "Then maybe it's time someone reminded you." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full. Full of thoughts too heavy to say. Full of truths neither of them wanted to admit. But inside her something cracked. It wasn't pain. It was relief. Like a mask finally slipping, Velzari rose to her feet. "Tomorrow, I will test you. You may hate me for it." Jace stood too. "Then test me. But understand this, every test you give me, I return in kind." She turned and walked out, but this time her steps were not firm. Her thoughts were louder than her footsteps. And in her mind echoed a single phrase she didn't want to admit. "He is not my pet. He is my equal." The next day, the entire palace gathered in the royal arena. It was rare for the Empress to host public trials. It was unheard of to put a human on display. But here was Jace, standing in the center, still collared, still calm. Around him roared alien nobles, generals, diplomats. Some called for execution, others for entertainment. Velzari raised her hand and the noise stopped. She walked into the arena slowly, wearing her war armor. Every eye turned to her. She held 2 weapons in her hand. One was a blade made of star steel. The other was a curved staff used in Zareth duels. She dropped both at Jace's feet. "Choose," she said, "and show them what your kind is made of." Jace looked at her then. At the weapons. His fingers closed around the staff, and when he turned to face the crowd, his collar shone in the light, but his eyes were brighter. The arena held its breath as Jace lifted the staff. His grip was firm, not because he wanted to fight, but because he understood that this was no longer about him. This was about what humans were made of. Not just for Velzari's court, but for every eye watching across the stars. He stepped forward slowly, staff raised in front of him, ready but not threatening. Across the sand stepped his opponent. A giant beast of a creature, wearing jagged armor and swinging a brutal hammer made from meteor core. It growled low, its tusks dripping venom, and the crowd erupted with noise. This was meant to be a public crushing. A lesson, a display of dominance. But Jace's eyes didn't flinch. He simply studied the creature's movement, his feet shifting with trained precision. Velzari watched from her throne above, body still, mind racing. She had chosen this test herself, a battle that should break any untrained prisoner. But she felt something strange in her chest. She didn't want him to lose. Worse, she didn't want him to fall. And when the beast charged, she stood up without realizing it. Jace waited until the last second. Then he stepped aside, staff spinning in a blur. The creature stumbled past him, crashing into the sand wall behind. Gasps filled the arena. But Jace didn't press the attack. He turned and faced the creature again, calm as ever. It was not a fight of rage. It was a dance of survival. And Jace danced like a man who had nothing to prove but everything to protect. Blow after blow came from the beast, but Jace used his small size and human agility to stay alive. He ducked, rolled, dodged with precision. His arms burned, his ribs ached. But he never let the pain show. One clean strike with the staff hit the beast in the knee. Then another in the elbow. The hammer dropped from its hand. And with a final move, Jace spun the staff under its legs, sweeping it down into the sand. Silence followed. The beast lay, stunned, the arena confused. And then one alien noble began to clap. Another followed. Soon, the stands erupted in cheers. Not just for the victor, but for something they didn't expect. Honor, control, grace. A human showing more dignity than any of their champions. Velzari looked down at Jace, her lips parted, her chest rising with something she didn't understand. Jace dropped the staff. He didn't raise his arms or bow. He simply turned to her and gave a slight nod. That was enough. She descended from her throne and walked into the arena, her long robe trailing behind like smoke. The crowd parted as she approached him. They stood only feet apart, face to face. She looked at the collar still on his neck. Then she looked into his eyes. "You could have killed him," she said quietly. "Why didn't you?" Jace answered, without hesitation. "Because I'm not here to entertain your empire. I'm here to remind it what mercy looks like." Those words hit harder than any strike. She reached forward slowly, fingers brushing the side of the collar, but she didn't remove it. Not yet. Later that night, Velzari sat alone in her garden. The stars above blinked across the glass ceiling. Her guards stayed far back, sensing her unrest. She didn't eat. She didn't speak. She only played Jace's words again and again in her mind. Remind it what mercy looks like. That line echoed through her like a whisper she couldn't. Silence. Jace, in the meantime, was taken back to his chamber, but this time without guards. No locks, no watchers. The collar remained, but its meaning had changed. Servants brought him fresh clothing, food, and strange Zareth books. No one called him prisoner anymore. Some even bowed. But Jace remained the same, quiet, calm, watching everything. The Empress visited again after 2 nights. She didn't speak at first. She stood in the doorway, watching him read a book on Zareth philosophy. He didn't rise when she entered. He simply said, "You should sit. You look tired." She didn't argue. She sat. For hours they spoke, not about war, not about victory, but about culture, about loss, about the color of Terran sunsets and the way children laugh in spring. There was no battle between them that night. Just 2 minds unlocking gates neither had opened before. Velzari laughed once. It startled even her. Jace raised an eyebrow. "You should do that more often." She shook her head. "Laughter is not for rulers." He leaned forward. "No, it's for the living." In that moment, something shifted forever. She reached toward his collar again. Her fingers lingered, but she didn't unfasten it. "Not yet." Instead, she said, "You're changing things you don't understand." Jace met her gaze. "Then explain them to me." Her hand fell away, and she stood to leave. Before the door closed behind her, she turned back and whispered something. That surprised even her. "You are not my pet. But I don't know what you are yet." The next morning, a new order was issued across the capital city. By decree of Empress Velzari, the human prisoner Jace Ward was no longer to be addressed as a slave. He was to be treated with the respect of a guest, under observation. This command shocked every level of the palace. Captives were rarely kept alive, let alone honored. But no one questioned the Empress. Her will was law. Velzari did not offer an explanation. She did not need to. Her mood had shifted. She no longer barked orders or crushed opinions with sharp words. She listened more, walked slower, looked out windows with something close to thoughtfulness. And always she returned to Jace, not as a ruler watching a toy, but as a student seeking something she couldn't name. Jace noticed the change, but he didn't push it. He accepted the meals, the open doors, and the occasional company of scholars sent to learn from him. He answered every question with patience. But his own questions were sharper. Why does your empire fear softness? Why is compassion a weakness here? And the one he asked most, who taught you to wear chains of your own? Each time, Velzari would pause before answering. She had grown up learning that power meant silence, that love meant control, and that vulnerability was death. But Jace challenged all of that without lifting a weapon. With each conversation, she felt like a veil was being torn from her eyes. One evening, she invited Jace to walk the royal garden. No guards, no chains. He hesitated, but only for a moment. Outside, the sky was violet with twin moons glowing softly. Alien flowers opened as they passed, releasing scents that shimmered like stars. Jace touched one gently. "Your world is beautiful," he said, "but it feels sad." Velzari turned her eyes toward him. "Why sad?" He answered, "Because everything here looks like it's afraid to breathe freely." She stopped walking. The words pierced something deep. For years she had ruled through fear and domination. She had conquered worlds and crushed rebellions. But no one had ever told her that her empire looked like it was gasping for air. She realized then that Jace saw things others refused to notice. And he did not use that vision to destroy. He used it to awaken. That night, Velzari removed her crown for the first time in a decade. She set it on a stone table and stared at it for hours. The weight on her head had never felt heavy before, but now it pressed like iron. She whispered into the darkness, "What are you doing to me, human?" And though no one heard it, deep down, she knew the answer. He was teaching her how to feel again. In the days that followed, Velzari invited Jace to the council hall. The nobles protested. One barked, "He is a beast in fine cloth." Another sneered, "We should be studying his bones, not his words." Velzari raised her hand. Silence fell like thunder. This human defeated our champion without cruelty. He survived our worst without begging. He has done more to command this court without a throne than any of you with one. Jace spoke calmly. He did not insult. He did not defend. He simply explained. Humanity is not perfect. But we love fiercely. We break, but we rebuild. We cry, but we rise. You call me weak because I smile. You call me soft because I show mercy. But your fear of those things proves their power. The hall grew quiet. Even the loudest critics found no words to fight his. Velzari dismissed the court early. She and Jace returned to the private chamber. But something in the air had changed. There was no more pretending. She sat beside him, not across. She spoke. Not as ruler to subject, but as one soul to another. You were meant to be a symbol, she said. A warning to others. But now I see you're a mirror. You reflect what I never wanted to face. Jace looked at her. And what is that? She answered slowly. That I built my power on silence, and you broke it with kindness. He didn't speak after that. He simply placed his hand over hers. For the first time in her life, Velzari didn't pull away. That evening, she ordered the collar to be removed, not by a servant. Not in secret, but in front of her entire council. The chain snapped softly as the metal opened. Jace stood tall, rubbing the mark it left behind. Velzari stepped forward, lifting the thin silver band in its place. But this one bore her crest and his name carved side by side. She placed it in his hand. This is not for control, she said. It is for choice. Jace looked at her, then at the band, then back. And finally he smiled. Jace stared at the silver band in his hand. The weight was light, but the meaning behind it pressed into his chest like a mountain. It was no longer a tool of dominance. This was something new. A gesture not born of power, but of recognition. Of understanding. He closed his fingers around it slowly and looked at Velzari. She didn't speak. She only watched, waiting for his choice. He didn't put it on. Not yet. He slipped it into his pocket and nodded. I'll wear it, he said quietly, but not as a prize, and not today. Velzari accepted this without anger. She didn't press him. Her court watched in stunned silence. No one dared speak. The human had not only survived, but shifted the very heart of their Empress. And now their ruler bowed her head slightly, as if receiving more than she gave. After the ceremony, Jace was no longer confined to his chamber. He walked the palace freely. Alien nobles avoided his path, some with fear, some with shame. Some with curiosity. The servants whispered when he passed. That's the human she talks to. That's the one who made her laugh. That's the one who made her hesitate. But Jace didn't care for the whispers. He walked with quiet purpose, as if still carrying the weight of his fallen world on his shoulders. Velzari invited him to state councils, to military briefings. She even allowed him to question her generals. At first, they resisted. But after one meeting where Jace dismantled a flawed invasion plan with only a few questions, the resistance melted. He didn't mock. He didn't boast. He simply pointed to what others refused to see. Even the most proud advisors had to admit his insight held weight. As the weeks passed, the Empress and the human spent more time together, not in royal halls, but in private places. In the ancient library, in the starlight observatory, in the hidden garden behind the palace walls. She asked about Earth's oceans again. This time, he told her about the sound of waves at night, about sand between toes, about how humans build castles from something meant to fall. Velzari closed her eyes and listened. He asked her about her childhood. She hesitated, but then she spoke of the cold rooms, the endless training, the lessons that taught her that love was weakness and trust was a threat. Jace didn't interrupt. He let her speak until her voice cracked. She had never shared these memories with anyone. And when she finished, he whispered, "You were shaped into a crown, but never taught how to be free." That night, Velzari stood on her balcony alone. The silver wind carried soft sounds from the lower city. She looked down and saw her people, living lives beneath her shadow. For so long, she had demanded loyalty through fear. Now she wondered what it would mean to earn it through grace. Jace's words echoed in her again. "You were shaped into a crown." She touched the small scar behind her ear. A mark from childhood training. A reminder that her power was built on sacrifice. Jace, in his own quarters, held the silver band. Again, he turned it over in his hands. It was beautifully crafted. Her crest and his name, side by side, like equals, like partners. He placed it on the table and stared at it under the soft light. He did not hate the Empress, not anymore. But he did not love her yet either. Something deeper was forming, something rare, something true. He didn't know the name for it. The next day, Velzari summoned him to the council again. But this time, not for war or plans. She asked him to speak to her people. "Tell them what you see," she said. "Not as a conqueror, not as a victim, but as someone who knows pain and still believes in peace." Jace hesitated. "They won't." "Listen." Velzari stepped closer. "They will, if you speak from truth." In the great hall, Jace stood before thousands. The alien crowd stared with quiet suspicion. But he didn't flinch. He stepped forward and spoke. "I was brought here in chains. I was meant to be broken. But I remained standing, not because I am strong, but because I remembered who I am." The hall stayed silent. He continued, "You may see me as lesser, as soft, but understand this. We humans survive because we love, because we forgive, because we get back up." Velzari watched from the throne, her hands tight around the edges. His words were not only reaching the people, they were reaching her. He wasn't performing. He was offering a truth none had dared speak in her court. And when he finished, the crowd stayed still. Then one noble stood and placed his weapon down. Another followed. Then another. Not a roar, not cheers, but quiet respect. Later, in the garden under the glowing moons, Jace stood beside Velzari again. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the silver band. Without a word, he placed it around his own wrist. Not the neck, the wrist. A symbol not of submission, but of connection. Velzari's eyes glistened. She said nothing. She simply placed her hand on top of his. Asterisk, the silver band on Jace's wrist gleamed under the soft glow of the twin moons. It was not heavy, but it carried the weight of everything he had endured. Velzari stood beside him, silent, her eyes not leaving his hand. For the first time, there were no guards between them. No court, no rules. Just two people who had changed each other more than any war ever could. The next morning, the palace was tense. Rumors spread faster than commands. Some whispered that the Empress had lost her grip. Others believed she was finally waking up from a long reign of shadows. The nobles were split. Some feared the humans' influence. Others began to admire it. The common citizens, though, began to smile when they heard his name. In the training arena, Jace stood before a row of Zarath soldiers. Velzari had asked him to teach them something human. Not war, not tactics, something deeper. He drew a circle. In the sand, "This is trust," he said. "Step in, and you fight with me, not against me." One soldier laughed. Another frowned. But one stepped forward and entered the circle. A second followed. Jace nodded. "Good, now we build something stronger than weapons." From the upper balcony, Velzari watched. She had seen thousands of soldiers drilled, punished, shaped into fear, but never had she seen warriors step forward from choice. She turned to her general. "What do you see?" The general, once a skeptic, answered with honesty. I see the beginning of something different. Velzari replied, different is what we need. Later that day, Jace walked through the city with her. They wore plain clothes, no guards, no royal symbols. At first, people stared in silence, but then a child waved. Then another offered a flower. Jace smiled and knelt to accept it. Velzari watched him with wonder. The people were not afraid. They were curious. They were alive. They reached a quiet market where an old Zareth elder sold painted stones. Velzari paused at one shaped like a star. These were used in the old days, the elder said, to ask for guidance. She looked at Jace. And, if it leads me to him? The elder smiled. Then follow it. Velzari bought the stone and placed it in Jace's hand without a word. That evening, they sat near a fountain that glowed with soft blue light. Velzari traced the edge of her cup. You've done what no weapon could, she said. You made me question everything. Jace leaned back. That's not power, that's presence. She looked at him. And yet it changed me. He answered. Because you let it. Her hand brushed against his, and this time, she didn't pull back. In the days that followed, Velzari invited humans from the outer colonies to speak at court. The Empire had long treated them as lesser. But now they were being heard. Jace sat beside her during these meetings. Not as an advisor, not as a tool, as a partner. The nobles resisted. But the Empress stood firm. A ruler must see beyond her own reflection, she declared. And today, I see farther than I ever have. Resistance grew in secret. A faction of old loyalists began to move in the shadows. They whispered of betrayal, of weakness, of the fall of the Dominion. They began to plot against her, against Jace, against everything that was changing. Velzari sensed the shift. They will not let this peace grow, she warned. Jace nodded. Then we must root it in something stronger than fear. One night, a messenger arrived breathless. A rebel ship had entered the palace airspace. An attack was coming. Not on the city, on them. Velzari's guards moved to shield her. But she raised her hand. No, we face this together. Jace stepped beside her. This is where change is tested. The two walked to the balcony as alarms echoed through the sky. The rebel ship hovered above, its guns pointed at the palace. A voice boomed through the loudspeaker. Return to tradition, Empress, or fall with your human. Velzari stepped forward. Then I choose to fall with the one who showed me how to rise. The guns charged. But before the first shot fired, the citizens below began to gather. One raised a light, then another. Soon the entire plaza glowed with torches, hands held high in silent defiance. The ship hesitated. It saw not a weak ruler, but a strong people. Not a lone human, but a united voice. And in that moment, it retreated. The crowd erupted in cheers. Velzari turned to Jace. They chose peace. He replied, because you gave them the courage to believe in it. That night, the city lit with celebration. Music echoed through the streets. And in the center tower, the Empress and the human stood together, not as ruler and subject, but as two souls who had rewritten destiny. Dawn broke over the capital city with golden light pouring across its domes and spires. The rebellion had vanished into the shadows. The people had spoken without words. The empire had shifted from fear to hope. And at the heart of it all stood a human and an empress who had once believed they would destroy each other. Velzari rose from her chamber early. She didn't call for servants. She didn't wear her crown. She walked barefoot across the smooth stone floors and paused before the quiet chamber where Jace had rested for weeks. The door was already open. Inside, Jace stood at the window, watching the rising sun. He turned when she entered, and for a moment, neither spoke. She walked to him slowly and offered him something wrapped in velvet. This belonged to my father. She said, "It was given only to those who led with both strength and heart." Jace opened it carefully. Inside lay a medal carved from lunar crystal. He looked up at her. "I'm not one of your people." She shook her head. "You are more than that. You're one of mine." Word of the medal spread through the palace. Never before had a human received such a symbol. The gesture was more than honor, it was legacy. And it sparked something deeper than respect. It sparked loyalty. More nobles stepped forward to support the changes. Military leaders requested new codes of justice. Even former enemies sent envoys of curiosity. But with every change came more resistance. The loyalist faction began gathering outside the capital, forming a silent army. Their banners bore the old sigil of conquest. Their message was simple: "Take back the throne, or we will." Velzari held a council that night. Some urged her to crush them with fire. Others begged her to flee. She looked at Jace. He said nothing. But his eyes held steady. She rose from her seat. "No fire. No retreat. I will speak to them myself." The room erupted in protest. Jace stood beside her. "She's not going alone." And with that, the plan was sealed. The next day, under heavy skies, the Empress and the human walked out of the city gates. Unguarded, side by side, thousands of warriors stood before them. The loyalist general stepped forward, armored and grim. "You've stained our name," he growled. "You've handed our glory to a weak race." Velzari didn't flinch. "No, I gave it to a strong heart," the general sneered. "Then die with him." He raised his blade. But before he could strike, Jace stepped forward and dropped something into the dust. It was the silver collar he had once worn. The crowd murmured. Jace spoke loudly. "This symbol was meant to control me." She turned it into something greater. "That's what real power does. It uplifts, not crushes." The general hesitated. Velzari took one step beside Jace and said, "If you kill me, kill him first. Because we are one choice, not separate." The loyalist army did not cheer. It did not attack. One soldier dropped his weapon, then another, until the silence became the voice of the people. The general stood frozen. Then, without a word, he turned and walked away. The army dissolved, and the empire stood changed forever. Jace and Velzari returned to the city. No parades, no speeches, just quiet understanding. In the days that followed, new laws were written, not by force, by voice. Every species was given counsel, every system a vote. For the first time in 1,000 years, the Dominion became something more than a name. It became a home. On the day of her coronation renewal, Velzari stood before the people in a silver robe lined with Terran cloth. She extended her hand to Jace before the crowd. He stepped forward and took it. Together, they walked to the center. She raised her voice. "This is not the beginning of a rule. This is the beginning of a bond," Jace added. "And we build it with trust, not chains." That night, in the palace garden, the two of them stood in silence. Above them, stars lit the sky like fireflies across the dark. Velzari placed her head on his shoulder. He said nothing. He didn't need to. She reached into her robe and pulled out the velvet cloth again. This time, inside was a second band. It bore no crest. Only a single word in Terran script. "Choice." Jace took it and placed it on her wrist. No ceremony, no crowd, just them, as equals. As more than leaders. As people who had survived not by fighting each other, but by learning to stand together. Asterisk, a year had passed since the collar was laid down in the dust, and the rebellion faded without blood. The galaxy watched as an empire known for conquest transformed into a place where dialogue replaced domination, where fear gave way to choice, where a human who once stood in chains now walked beside an empress who had once been a queen of war. Jace spent his days helping restructure systems of justice, education, and diplomacy. He traveled to outer colonies where humans once suffered in silence. Now they met him with banners of peace and hands lifted in trust. He spoke not as a ruler, but as a witness. He reminded them what strength really looked like, not fists, not weapons, but standing again after falling, and offering your hand to lift someone else. Velzari too had changed. Her throne room was no longer a place of fear. It was a place of questions, of voices, of disagreement, and of decisions made by many, not one. She still held power, but it no longer held her. Her laughter returned. Her robes grew lighter. She wore no crown now unless ceremony demanded it. And always, the silver band on her wrist remained. Together, Jace and Velzari established the Unity Accord, a document written in both Zareth and Terran languages. It promised freedom of voice, shared learning, and protection for all species under one banner, not of control, but of dignity. The agreement was signed not with pens, but with handprints pressed side by side into crystal, sealing a new kind of legacy. Not all accepted it quickly. Old rulers, silent lords, jealous leaders from distant systems resisted. Some challenged it in whispers, some with weapons. But the unity held, not because of force, but because people saw what had happened between Jace and Velzari. They saw that two hearts could change the course of history, not through blood, but through boldness. In private, their bond had deepened. They did not call it love at first. They did not need to. It was something steady, something tested, something that had survived doubt, pride, and the fire of old beliefs. Velzari once asked him quietly, "Did you ever hate me?" Jace had answered, "No, but I hated what they made you become." She had wept that night, not out of weakness, but out of release. One morning, as light poured into the garden, Jace knelt in the soil, planting seeds from earth. Terran blossoms had never grown on Zareth soil before. Velzari approached him, her robe brushing soft leaves as she walked. "Will they bloom?" she asked. Jace looked up. "Only if the roots are real." She nodded and knelt beside him. Her hands joined his. Together, they covered the seeds with care. That same day, a message came from a distant moon. An ancient AI system had activated for the first time in centuries. It asked to meet the ones who had rewritten the Empire. Jace and Velzari traveled there together. The AI studied them and declared, "Organic balance achieved." It handed them a relic older than their oldest ships. A key once used by the first travelers of the stars. "Use this to open futures that deserve light," it said. On their return, they placed the relic in the Hall of Renewal. It became a symbol, not of war, but of awakening. Children from across systems came to see it. Schools told stories not of battles, but of bravery born from empathy. Statues of old conquerors were replaced with carvings of farmers, healers, and poets. One statue stood tallest, not Jace, not Velzari, but of a Terran child holding the hand of a Zareth elder. That evening, as the two stood on the palace balcony, they watched lights flicker across the city like stars fallen to the ground. Velzari turned to Jace. "Are we finished?" He shook his head gently. "No, but we've begun." She smiled and said, "Then let us protect this beginning." He reached into his coat and pulled out something small. It was the original collar, cleaned, polished, transformed into a simple ring. He offered it to her, not as a chain, as a promise. Velzari took it, tears shining in her eyes. "Then I offer you mine." She removed the silver band from her wrist and placed it around his. Two symbols, two choices. No longer rulers and prisoner, no longer human and alien. Just two souls bound by truth. Their union was not sealed with a grand wedding or loud festival. It was sealed with silent agreement, With every meeting they walked into hand in hand. With every child they listened to. With every enemy they forgave. And with every garden they planted together, years passed. The Terran flowers bloomed in colors never seen before. They spread across the palace, down the roads, and into the hearts of every world that once knew only darkness. And wherever those blossoms bloomed, the people whispered a single story. Of a human who wore a collar not to obey but to lead. And of an empress who once ruled through fear, but found freedom by following his light.